Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Malum Veritas for Jared. As you can see, getting written up, he's a human ranger, he's lawful good, he's about 35 years old, 5'9", 160 pounds, he's got some pretty good stats. What is there to say about Malum? The process that involved, or that I went through with this one was a little bit of an interesting challenge in that Jared gave me probably the most specific set of descriptions possible for this character, and that is he had photographs of all the different parts, or at least photos of very close facsimiles of the different aspects of Malum's outfit and character, and that made things a bit. I wouldn't say it easier. It made it more straightforward, but it also made it quite challenging in the way that well, I don't know what way it would be challenging. It was sort of neat to try to take what he had given me and then sort of stitch it all together in a way that sort of made it all look like it was on one person. But it was also sort of tricky to not try to do too much that I would have wanted to have done. Not that that's a hassle. Like, it's fine if someone has like particular things about their character, but what can I say? But so I mean, there's not much as far as thought or input or ideas that went into the character. But I mean, there's going to be stuff we can talk about. I mean, there were of course some things, and we'll get into that as they show up. So let's see what we can talk about as we go. So the pose, Jared wanted. He sent me a photo of the pose even, which that's the first time that's happened. But it's a guy with a bow on one knee, sort of about to shoot, and I like the idea of branching out into doing some more dynamic poses as we go. So I was interested in the challenge of that. But as far as the being down on one knee, it's fine for the character, which will go into his history and his personality and all that stuff as we go. But as far as like having like a big lineup of characters by the end, I'm probably not gonna go down to anybody on one foot or two or on their knees or anything until I run out of ideas as far as poses go. So I wanted to just have him be upright, and I also think it seems a little bit more actiony. I mean, I guess if somebody's like a stealth fighter or like a deep forest dwelling ranger like Malum is, then it makes sense that he'd be kneeled down and getting a sneak attack in. But I just thought having somebody. I mean, if I'm going to be going dynamic, I just wanted to go even more dynamic. Something of a bit of a challenge. I started getting a bit paranoid about whether I'm really foreshortening things enough, or if I'm if I'm drawing different limbs at different angles, am I really drawing them as differently from each other as they should be? So I wanted to just try to force myself into that sort of mode here. So now, after seeing how little of the amount of time spent on these pieces is spent on the posing stage, I felt that it'd be nice to just go ahead and spend a lot more time on that than I normally would. So I go through quite a few more iterations than I normally would on characters with Malum, especially getting back into the swing of like something a bit more dynamic. It was nice to have some more time afforded to that segment of it. Which is something I want to do more of moving forward. The other thing too, just a little subtle thing, is in the description, all of his swords and his weaponry and everything is in Jared's description is flipped from the way that I've actually drawn it. I've got everybody sort of facing off to the right a little bit, or at least some more so than others, but I just wanted to have this guy fall in line with that, so I drew him facing the direction suitable for me, but then when I sent Jared his copy, I had to flip it back over so it was correct for the actual character itself. So that's like the one discrepancy here. One thing that was driving me a bit nuts about this character is that I have a nasty habit of always drawing legs too long. I'm trying to stay more and more cognizant of it, but in this case, it was sort of frustrating in that I got the anatomy to the point where I liked it. I was pleased with like the proportions and everything. But as I was working on it, the longer I looked at it, the more and more it looked like his legs were just way too long, or his torso was way too long. Something was off. Maybe like his head was too small or something. And I think a big part of it is just down to the fact that like he's got quite baggy pants on, and so like the crotch of the pants is sort of drooping down low, and it kind of is helping make the mind in the fill in the space there with just extra body underneath the pants. So, but that sort of stuff's just gonna happen. I just figured that if I know the structure's there. I know I can just relax and have faith in it and just sort of fight it. And if I have to, by the end I can tweak it. So I just kind of kept moving forward. And it ended up not being too bad. Although now, even in this case, one of the annoying things about watching these again while I comment on them is I see all these tiny little things that I would have done differently or would have tweaked or changed or adjusted. Or although sometimes when I see them, I forget that I do eventually tweak them, so they still look bad the second time around. But I just forgot that I looked bad the first time around. So then I get to watch and see them. Excuse me. Or see myself go back and change the stuff, which is just kind of fun and funny. So this is still a process that I quite like. As far as starting off with the notes and then the gestural pose and then the skeleton and the muscles and building it up like that. I think it's fun. It's all just good practice. In case this is you haven't seen many of these videos, it's not. I don't often go this thoroughly when I'm working. Like I do quite a bit of concept art as part of my work, both like my 9 to 5 and freelance stuff. But this is also a major part of this series that I'm doing of these people's characters. Is sort of just my own practice and development, both for technique and skill level and knowledge and everything. So that's why I'm going and doing all these extra sort of steps and levels and sort of building things up as I go. When it comes to the human body and the muscular system and the skeletal system and everything and where every muscle connects and how they overlap and how they bend and bulge and whatever and just flow and function. There's so many different parts to it that you can get an overall general sense with enough study, but I find that I've got this brain that will push stuff out to make room for new stuff, and so I'm constantly trying to remember where muscles go and keeping on top of things. So it's just good practice for myself. I think one day I'll be a pro at it. So that's my hope. So he's 5'9" and 160 pounds. It's pretty much like near average height, near average weight, like very just sort of normal body. I figured if this guy is, he does live out in the wilderness. Actually, I should go into his story a bit, but I figured he'd be pretty stringy, sort of, but still like bulked out a little bit. So it's got kind of like that, like I don't know, just like a foresty sort of wilderness survivalist sort of body type. He's a successful hunter, so he's not malnourished, but and he's an accomplished woodsman and survivalist, so he's not like ruined or anything, but he'd be lean and hardworking and everything. So he's got a pretty sturdy muscular system. So I'll go over his backstory. So he was born on excuse me, I'm yawning a lot again. I gotta learn why I'm yawning so much when I do these videos and put a stop to it. But as a boy, he grew up on a farm just outside of a town. His parents taught him the importance of hard work and the value of a copper coin, or just money. Um, Being an only child, he had to forego formal education in order to help his family make enough to get by. So he's working on the farm. It's like the good old days. What he lacked in formal schooling, he made up for by teaching himself from what books he was able to purchase with his modest allowance. He was also afforded the ability to learn from nature. Being so close to the wilds, he would often steal away to the forest in his free time to observe the animals and pick herbs and flowers. And it sounds like pretty wholesome and awesome rural life. Excuse me. I'm just reading through Jared's notes here. He's a good character. Around the time he reached manhood, his parents gained enough financial stability to hire workers to help run the farm. This opened up a world of possibilities for Mal. Having experienced a very simple and provincial childhood, Mal decided to join the military in order to see the lands that lie beyond the local borders and experience the world at large. So Mal spent most of his 20s in the service, and in the course of his career he witnessed all it had to offer, both good and bad. He remembers fondly the camaraderie that he shared with his fellow soldiers, as well as the characteristically short-lived connections he formed with the civilians he was often tasked to protect. It is not the fond memories that he remembers most, however. The memories that come to him most vividly and still haunt him to this day are the ones that make up what can only be described as the horrors of war. Death, destruction, and the degeneration of the mind and conscience. Mal bore witness to this decline, both in others and also in himself, to the point where enemies were no longer considered people, to the point where even the civilians they were sent to protect were expendable. The breaking point for Mal came when he was ordered by his superior officers to interrogate an enemy prisoner. After hours of questioning, the man they had taken captive was not giving Mal the information that he was asked to get. Upon reporting to his superior that his attempt had been unsuccessful, it was deemed necessary for Mal to try a more forceful approach. Being dutiful to a fault, Mal complied, and after 3 hours of subjecting the man to all manner of torture, he finally told Mal what he wanted to hear. He also told Mal something he did not expect, that the reason he did not give up the information was that his commander had threatened to kill the family of any soldier who gave up information to the enemy. He did not want to withhold the information out of a sense of duty or honor. He simply wanted to protect his wife and children. Mal later learned that the man was executed and made to look like he died in combat. Mal was told by his superior officer that if the man told others of his torture, they would both be charged with war crimes. Mal also learned that the information gained from torturing the man was deemed not strategically important and was never utilized. Mal never found out what became of the man's family. The next day, Mal snuck out of his barracks in the middle of the night, raided the armory for supplies and weapons, and made his way into the forest, turning his back on society. A society that could foster this kind of disregard for life and well-being. A society that could turn a blind eye to these kinds of atrocities. He spent the next 5 years in the wilderness, living off the land and learning from nature how to be whole again. During this time, he had almost no contact with people other than trading with the occasional traveling merchant. A life of solitude had afforded him time to practice woodworking and herbalism, and he used these talents to create potions and trinkets to trade for items he could not make himself. Although his contact with the more civilized races was limited, he did not have frequent encounters with the Fae. Initially suspicious of him, the woodland creatures eventually began to form a bond with this human that had decided to call the forest his home. Out of necessity, Mal learned the Sylvan language in order to communicate with the Fae. Once he was able to communicate with them, he began to hear stories of sightings of malevolent creatures that were encroaching on their territory, orcs, goblins, and other foul things. Mal, realizing that he could not remain a passive outsider any longer, took it upon himself to assist the Fae with defending their lands. Over time, the enemies he faced increased in number and grew bolder by the day. Before long, Mal found himself acting not as a defender, but as an insurgent in increasingly hostile lands. It was no longer just orcs and goblins, but giants as well. Unable to defeat giants in single combat on fair terms, Mel began using guerrilla tactics, observing them from a distance, waiting until one was by himself and separated from the others, and then luring him into a carefully placed ambush. Over time, through countless hours of this kind of stealthy observation, Mal was able to learn not only giants' weaknesses, but their language as well. So yeah, and then it goes on and on. Oh, that sounds sarcastic, but it goes on and explains his tactics with fighting and then things of goblins and giants and how that all went. But that's basically the backstory. That's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a lot of stuff that I would. As I was reading the description, I remember I was on the bus riding home after work, and I just was going through that description, and I read it all, and my mind was racing about all these different little details and artifacts and things and different sort of signs and these little sort of hints and clues I could decorate the character with. And then I was pretty excited about it. I mean, I was still, happy to make this piece, but then, going forward as I went more and more, it was like, okay, he's got this sword and he's got this bracer and he wears this sort of shirt and his cloak looks like this and he wears it that way. And I don't want to say it wasn't a lost opportunity. It was still, I mean, he's got a decided outfit, and this was more of a, let's just say this is more of like a character illustration of something very set. There's this very canon, and I just sort of, it would have been nice to have a bit more free reign, but as long as like the mental posture is there, as long as you can just sort of be like, okay, this piece here, this is more fan art, I should say. I should have just said that instead of rambling on and on for as long as I did. So this is basically fan art for Malum Veritas. Although I don't know if that would be pronounced with the any sort of Latin accent or anything. Now, one thing I did differently here is in the frame, everything sort of sticking off the figure. I didn't want to commit to just yet because there are certain things that needed to be adjusted and just made sure that they worked well. Sort of like the flowing of the cape or the arms of the bow or the size or the proportions of the sword and everything. And I just wanted to keep moving forward really quick, so I figured I would just leave them outside. There's something that would be done on top of the frame sort of afterwards. So I just left spaces with little notes to remind myself, just to make sure that I didn't forget everything that would still need to be re-added back in. Now this one almost beat me. This one was really tough. Even as far as process, I kept just trying different things and going different layers and like tweaking stuff and trying to structure things. And there's probably, I'm not sure if it'll show up in this version here, but you'll probably see for a long portion of it, that I don't really accomplish much of anything. He kind of stays in the same sort of range of, or like level of completion for quite a while I move layers around and I tweak stuff and I play with the curves and I'm just like nudging things and trying out different, like I render it with the simple black occlusion layer multiple times, and nothing was really sticking. Nothing was really working out too well for me, but I was starting to get frustrated. But I just, every time that happens to me, if I just stick with it, it's like hitting your head up against a brick wall, and eventually it's going to crack. At least one of them's going to crack, your head or the wall. And I didn't want to let the wall win this time, so I just kept working on it. I basically at one point just said, I'm just going to paint it and keep working. And if something needs to be changed, then I'll just change it later on. And that's just kind of when things started working out. That's all I needed to do, really. This week's video is actually, I got contacted by some sort of company place that is gonna, they do, I think it's every month or every week. I think maybe every month, but they have like they get video of somebody doing some art and they set it to music, and they have like a little artist bio sort of thing written up or up there, and so they wanted me to use they wanted to use one, so they wanted the latest one, so I was doing this for them, but I mean with them in mind, and I think that was probably a big part of it was like now I've got like who like people are watching, even though I know every week people are watching these things. It was just sort of it's like it's this that sort of crippling pressure when you know that someone's watching you draw. I know a lot of people don't have that. I've been able to sort of work around that just from exposure. Like when I was a teacher, I would often have to just do little notes or little demos or something, and the pressure was on, and it was freaky. And I've always found it really difficult to draw when somebody's watching you and watching every move, and hopefully not noticing all the horrible mistakes you're making. But I just know that I don't know, something about just knowing that like people that are watching all these videos by other artists are going to be watching it. And, yeah. Anyway, I think it was just getting to me a little bit. It was sort of making me. I was trying to be. I think I was being too careful. I was being too precious, and rather than thinking, I think once I just decided to think about the character, then that's when it kind of started working out a lot better. So yeah, as I've said multiple times already, I think it's just every part was very thoroughly described as far as like the character and the costume. As far as any sort of creative input, I would say here on this character, the only things that I did really differently was I simplified the bow. I just made it something just based on like a simple like old British longbow, just something that he could have made himself out in the woods, something disposable, like if he lost it, he wouldn't want it, he wouldn't need it back, he wouldn't like it wouldn't be like a significant thing, something he could just go and make in like a couple days or like an afternoon, or I'm not sure how long it would really take someone like this to make a bow like that, but something very utilitarian. And then I also put on, like right near the very end, if you've seen the finished one, just the silencers on the bowstring, just these 3 puffs of feather and fur that just sort of help muffle the sound of the bow, which I felt would be suitable, especially because Jared was treating this character as obviously as like a stealthy sort of ranger, forest wanderer type, so I thought that'd be important if he's going to be using a bow. If anything, I probably should have like coated the ends of the bow with soot or some sort of darker pigment so it didn't stand out. It's quite bright yellow by the end of everything, but I think it worked out pretty good. So this is when I'm entering the stage of trying things and retrying things and stuff not working, and oh my goodness, what am I doing? And people are going to see and I'm going to fail and they're going to think I'm bad, and just me being just a diva. It was just horrible, but I just kept working, and once I just simplified things and just was like, well, you know what, I'm just going to paint. Let's just paint stuff. Other stuff that it was sort of up to me is I dirtied him up. I made him dirty at the end. It was the last thing I did, and then I also just sort of made his beard very bushy and grows very high up his face. Everything else was Jared. Now, I'm not complaining. Jared did a great job with this character design. I knew that I was going to enjoy this one once I read the word Aragorn in the description. And in a way, it was actually kind of a little bit like a vacation to just be told, like, give him this, give him that. I mean, Jared was very polite. He didn't tell me to do this, but it was really nice to just see the list and just be like, oh, okay, nice. I don't have to burn my brain out at all a little bit. We're working on this. And I think most of the pressure just came from knowing that there's going to be extra people watching this one. Yeah, all in all, once I just settled on just painting, just put color where I think color should go, and just keep painting on it until it's working. That's all it took for this one. So, like I'm an artist that can get stuck into ruts. I don't know that many artists in real life, at least not enough to to talk with them. But I know, like, my brother and I growing up, it was always like we just knew exactly what each other meant when we said I'm stuck in a rut, and that's basically when you got no ideas of what to draw. Every time you start to draw, the drawing just falls apart. It just, nothing works, and you never feel good about anything. And I feel like I've been in a bit of a rut these last little while, and I've got, over the years, I've developed my own sort of techniques as far as like how to get out of it. Mostly I can just tell, like, sometimes it slightly affects, this is the first time it's ever crept into this sort of work, like the R&D fantasy stuff, but the first symptoms always show up in my sketchbook, where I can just start any new page or continue on a page, and like no drawing is ever good, and no drawing ever gets finished because it's not good, and I've got no original ideas, and everything just crumbles apart. And the best thing that I've found that works for me oftentimes is just switching medium. Like, typically I'll be working with pen or graphite for a long time, and once I find myself stuck in a rut doing that, then I'll switch to the other one. So if I'm using pen, I'll start drawing with graphite, and that kind of jars me loose. And it's worked quite a bit. And my theory is that it's when, like, I think it's when when I'm like drawing a face, I'm thinking about how I draw a face. Like, an eye is shaped like this, and then I do this step, and then I do that. It's sort of like trying to dance by remembering exactly what to do next and what's coming up next, rather than just sort of feeling the rhythm of the beat and just dancing how you gotta dance at the time. It's hard to explain. It's very tricky to explain, but I think I'm hoping people know what I mean. But it's like when I'm thinking about like what shape something has to be, or what style something has, then I start falling into a rut. But if I just sort of let go and I'm just like, let's just draw a face, and I just think about like the character or the personality or whatever, that can kind of jar me loose. But if anybody has any other ideas about how to get out of a rut, let me know, because they're not fun. I like sketching on the bus, but if you just can't draw, it's no fun. Yeah, and I think that's what was catching me up when I was working on all this stuff. By now, though, I've finally sort of found my stride. Just painting it in, and just letting it be, and just moving on. Just sort of getting things up to a more general level, and then going on to the next thing, and then coming back. That can help. But it reminds me of like, I find a lot of success with techniques or like depicting things or styles or whatever is when you think more about the thing that you're depicting rather than how you're depicting it. Like, I was always incapable of doing this sort of like painterly style where there's not really any line art and it's just blobs of color. Basically the way that I work now, and like I'm making these videos where it's all more painterly. And I couldn't do it until one day when I realized that, like, I finally did it successfully, and I realized it was because I wasn't thinking anymore about how to do it. I was just thinking about what material I was painting. So I was working on some helmets, and I was just trying to make it look the way that it should look, with just daubs of paint or color, and just putting them where they should go. And it was just through doing that I was able to just sort of let things go. And because before I was always like, okay, now I need to increase the darkness this much, and then put this sort of color here, but don't get too detailed, and then it's got to come back over here. And I was trying to think of it as like the steps or the process, and not just depicting something. And once I just started thinking about what I was depicting, it worked out. And then I could just do it all of a sudden. And then it just took a lot of practice and figuring out techniques and finding what worked for me, and still doing that. But it's a great process. So yeah, he's got some light leather armor. He's got a gambeson that he wears, one of those like padded shirt sort of tunic things that you'd wear under armor. one thing that's been actually really great is dealing with Jared. He's got a really awesome knowledge of history and medieval arms and armor, and he's been able to hook me up with quite a few great sources on information, and that's what I'm really excited about these days. Is just poring over stuff, just learning as much as I can. It's definitely one thing that the more I do these, the more I realize that I need to learn that I don't know about armor and arms and everything, and like how they're fabricated, how they're styled. And I'm really excited about learning more. Actually, Jared recommended a website to me, and that I've actually only come across in the past year or so. That's like my favorite by far so far. Has just been myarmory.com. I believe it's .com, but it's spelled the British way with the ARMOURY, My Armory, and it's just this fantastic website with just great information about arms and armor. And that's been sort of my, when I'm bored or have time, I go there and just read articles about how stuff was made and why it was shaped the way things are. And it's just very fascinating. I got a membership on the forums there, and I've just been poring over everything I can find. So one thing I was really conscious about trying to do with this face is based, especially the eyes were based around some reference of a guy named, I believe it was John, but his last name is Muir. Is some sort of a outdoorsy guy from the 1800s. But I wanted it to look, a little bit like that, about like him, because it's part of the description. But I was also really conscious that I didn't want it to look like the other characters, Rayleigh or Fargrim, the dwarf. Because you got these guys with dark beards or like spooky eyes or intense eyes and beards, and I just wanted to make sure that they were at least distinct enough to be distinct, I guess you could say. That's one thing I'm actually really excited about this project for, is keeping a lookout for things that I do the same over and over and over again, like stuff that, like finding out my bad habits. I'm really good at, or it's easy for me to point out or to notice other people's bad habits, but on my own, that's kind of what I'm hoping to find out through this process. And that's like, do I draw eyes the same way? Do I render the area around the cheeks and where the nose attaches to the face the same way? Or am I sort of putting my weight on the same crutches too often as far as that sort of stuff goes? I often begrudge a lot of artists for suffering from same facism, where if they're drawing a head, they're just like, well, a head is shaped like this, and a jaw is shaped like that, and angry eyes are shaped like this, and a nose has this curve to it, and you just have something where everybody looks the same. Or it's like a Metal Gear Solid game, or where it's just like everybody just looks like a vague 22-year-old that's been soaking in a bathtub for too long, and then, oh, they're old. Okay, let's put white hair on them and hesitantly paint in some slight wrinkles, and it just never works, and it just looks real bad. And I'm just so terrified of that happening to me. So I'm always trying to not let that happen. Don't know where I was going with that, but it's something that I think artists should be more wary of, because a big part of about a character is their face and their body type, and there's things that just they get comfortable and easy about drawing faces, because faces are hard. So the harder something is to draw, the more tempting it is to kind of go back to the same stuff that works over and over and over again. I think my recommendation for avoiding that would be, you don't have to use reference. Like, you don't have to always look up a face and paint it like you're doing a portrait. But if you just have photos of faces available and like arranged somewhere, or like even just one on somewhere on your monitor, or even just like saved onto like the image itself as just a reminder of how variable a human face is, or how much subtlety there is to it, or or even just sort of like incorporating particular aspects of that face onto your character that can just help ground it and compare it. Like you can go through like gigabytes of pictures and models on like ArtStation of what look like photorealistic faces, but the second you compare them to just a photo, just a random photo of a real human face, they just fall apart and they just look so artificial. And there's just like no, I mean, they look great a lot of the time, like really well sculpted and lots of detail, but there's no soul. And I don't know what it is, if it's like, if it's something that like a modeler would call a flaw, or asymmetry itself, or little things that you just wouldn't predict, like certain blotches or discolorations or lumps or bumps or something. Just really subtle things about the face that all add up. And if you rely on your imagination, or just go off of your was it intuition, or just some sort of artistic instinct for too long, you even though it might take you a while, you'll develop a rhythm or a beat, or like something that's really really consistent. So just having something that can remind you of how much life and personality there is in a real face is highly recommended. And that's sort of my thing. Now, did I go far enough as far as Fargrim and Malum go? I don't know. I'd imagine that I could probably see more of a difference than someone else, just because I'm used to their faces more. But this guy did sort of come with certain features that sort of had to be there, like the shape of his nose and his eyes, and it just sort of happened to be quite similar. But I definitely want to make sure that I put extra effort in the future to making sure that every character has a distinct look to their face. But it's fun. It's a rewarding thing to do. It's really neat. So this is a great chance for my using the black frame sort of idea to come through. I've got that frame around the character that I put in every time. It just sort of speeds it up by making it so I don't need to keep tidying up the edges of the figure. I can just keep things neat without thinking about it. But by keeping it clean, I can invert it between black and white, depending on what sort of tone I'm working in, or like how much subtlety I'm working on. If I'm working with a lot of stuff that's like really shifted towards dark, or stuff that's really subtly like variant amongst itself, I switch it to black. And then if I need to find out if it's really reading clearly enough or brightly enough, then I'll switch it to white. And if I can't see any details or what's going on when it's got the white background, then I need to lighten it up. And then when I switch it to darkness, if I can't see anything, any sort of some things should be subtle, but it's easier to see that stuff in the darkness, against the black. But I'd recommend it. I think that's one of the things that's definitely going to stick around as far as my technique goes. So one thing I'm still on the fence about as far as like painting approach and technique is, and this varies, I guess, depending on the artist, but also on the mediums used, whether whatever type of traditional stuff or digital is. When you're painting, do you paint dark to light? Do you paint light to dark, or do you paint starting from the mid range and adding light and adding dark? And anytime I've tried working in any particular way, it's never worked. But anytime that I just forget all about that stuff, it works. It's like what I was talking about earlier, where once I just thought about what I was depicting and just getting it to look like what it needed to be, rather than how I was going to get there, I just found that I just got there really quickly and quite a lot more easily. But every time I've set out to follow a tutorial or do anything how someone else does it, even though I'll eventually wind up with something pretty much identical to how somebody else has painted something as far as technique goes, every time I've ever tried that, it's never worked. It's been a frustrating mess. I mean, the value of a tutorial is there. So if you're looking up like our tutorials, like how to paint this or how to, paint in general, and if you get discouraged, I would say that's okay. It's okay to just get discouraged. I like looking at tutorials just to kind of, I find it demystifying of the process. I like to just see like, this person made this amazing thing or this impressive thing, and then they just took these few simple steps, and it's all just the fundamentals. Okay, it's all just composition, line, color, value, shape, and pattern and texture, and it's just an arrangement of all those simple parts. There's like anatomy and drapery and materials and lighting, and everything is just made out of that stuff. So once you get a handle on that, you can just sort of do whatever you like. I also remember one other thing I did was I gave him bloody knuckles on his bow. I felt he needed a bit more texture there. And I did play a little bit fast and loose when I do his hand up by his face. He was... I had all, like, when I was reading the description, I had all these ideas of, like, how much military is he going to have on him as far as his character design, and how am I going to show that he's ex-military rather than just not having, how's that's going to go. I did find one way to sort of, I'm not expecting anyone to ever think this is true or even a good idea. I would never ever think anybody would notice this, but I just made his thumbnail really dirty. And I was just thinking of that as like a way to show that he's not down with the military anymore. Because like military is always like, they're always talking about like, cleaning and grooming your nails and being clean and orderly and everything, and the regimented like get up and shave and do all this fancy hygiene stuff, like they're a bunch of millionaires or something. But I thought that as a way to sort of show how thoroughly he'd just been revolted by it and bucked everything, was that he didn't keep his hands fastidiously groomed. So that was it was nice to sort of dance, to try to find places to dance between the directions of Jared and put things here and there where I can. Jared did get a little bit impatient, and after I sent him the final piece on Saturday, he asked me why he only had one bow in his quiver. And the reason I did that is, it was going to come up in this video, but he just couldn't wait, so I told him he could just consider that like the trailer for the video. But the reason I've got him posed and equipped the way he is, so he's got the reason he's got the one arrow in his quiver is the same reason why he's not looking down his arrow, and it's because he's surrounded. So he's pulling up, he's ready, but he's sort of like looking around, assessing like who's all around him and how many are left. And by having one arrow left in the quiver, it means that he's shot more arrows and so, or he's at least survived longer, which means he's more badass. And so that's why he's got one arrow, and that's why he's not looking down the arrow that he's got knocked up and he's about to shoot. So there's that I got to put in there. This sword is actually I actually really like the look of this sword. This was actually a sword that Jared owns himself, and he had a lot of pictures of him wearing it and different angles of it. I didn't go in and add as much of the finer details that the sword actually has. I just sort of wanted to get it vaguely in. Sometimes it can be better to leave stuff a little bit vague, because if you go in and add the details but you get the details wrong, it's kind of worse than having just sort of vague generalized details. It's sort of a weird thing. I don't know if that even makes sense, but it was actually, it's an impressive looking sword. It has a lot of neat like kind of leather work, and like even the belt and how it's sort of held up, sort of like a simple kind of baldric type thing. It was an impressive sword. It was cool, and it's neat. I thought it was just awesome to see somebody whose character kind of blends in with real life in that sort of way, like somebody who's sort of weaving their own actual artifacts into D&D and vice versa. Is actually that's pretty cool. I always like having like gear or like artifacts that feel like an artifact like from the game or from the world or anything. Yeah, that's just kind of fun. And then also, this is another thing that I did was I gave him a blanket stitch on this cloak. Now I did do the cloak thinking it was more of like a wool wool cloak, something super warm. I'm sure somebody who's aware of military stuff like Jared, he's probably aware that wool is an excellent material for outdoorsy stuff. It retains 80% of the heat even when soaking wet. And the military, the surplus military wool blankets that you see all the time always have that blanket stitch around the outside. So I just wanted to have that as part of like a hint to like the military-ishness. So yeah, that was another little part that I put in there from the military stuff, was based on the U.S. military blanket. I don't know if they still use those anymore. Oh well. If you can hear any sort of scratching or weird sounds, it's just my cat just came up and he's on my shoulder, so I hope that's not weird sounding or noticeable. But he's being nice, so that's good. He's always nice though. One thing I appreciated about some of the kit that Jared gave me. Now the thing that was good about Jared's things, I don't want to sound like I'm disparaging what he did by being prepared. Not at all. It was good. But the stuff that he had was all really solid stuff. Like the gambeson was great, just nice simple pants, practical boots, a really cool like bracer. The bracer doesn't look quite exactly like the one that he had shown me, but I mean even like the archer's glove and the quiver and like everything that he had, even though it was sort of ready made for me, it was all still really good. And one of my favorite parts about it was that the pommel of this dagger on his chest and the sword were very similar. And I like that. I like it. Those look like something that he's been issued, or that come from the same place, or at least made in the same town or culture. I thought that was really fun. They're really good. They're good sort of stuff. I did paint them a little bit more similar than how they would actually be in real life, but they were definitely close enough. It would have been neat to incorporate something. Like I wonder, like what more about what kind of equipment you would need to be killing giants with. I figured giants would best be fought with guerrilla sort of tactics, with like traps and snares and much more. You'd probably need to be much more strategic with that sort of thing. But then it makes me think of like how would a goblin hunt a man, or something our sized. Like what an adventurer like us would need to be on the lookout for, and if the tactics would even be similar, would they scale appropriately? I like to think about that kind of stuff. So bowstring, the bow is it is foreshortened a bit, but the bow is knocked quite a bit higher up towards the top of the bow. I'm actually pretty okay with drawing a bow knocked pretty much anywhere on a bowstring. If you look up, I can't remember if it's Korean or Japanese. I think even both of them, they have these really asymmetrical bows sometimes, where one of them, like one half of the bow is like way over their head, and the other part is sort of below. I don't know if that would carry over onto like a long bow, like something like a U kind of or sort of bow, but I don't know. I should probably look into that more before I start taking liberties with how to draw an arrow on a bow. But it sure looks cool when they do it. I think I'd like to see that more in fantasy, at least in an elf. Next time I do an elf archer drawn with a bow and they're pulling their bow back, I'm going to do something more like that. Try to push the expectations, or sort of sidestep the expectations, but replace the expectations, but with something that is still just as valid. I think that's. Actually, I should probably do a video on that. I think that's a big part of concept art, at least the stuff that I like, where anytime you see a design and you recognize it, you see that it can work, but it's fresh. I think that's kind of the best stuff. I would need to spend probably a month or a few weeks trying to find examples of what I mean. Or even seeing if I could make much of it, but I think that's really those are the most magical things. Man, I wish I could think of an example. I'm always really horrible at coming up with an example right off the top of my head of something. But that's sort of the trick. That's why studying history and other cultures is so important, because you get to see all the multiple solutions to the same problems that we've been dealing with as humans for the last couple 100,000 years. Come down here, Quincy. Okay, there we go. You'll see so many different cultures, even thousands of miles and thousands of years apart, doing the same things, like bows and swords and clubs and sails and floating objects and pyramids and all these different things, but they've all come across them through different means and different manifestations. And you don't have to. I mean, I think I say it in every video, but you don't have to just make a collage out of stuff that exists, like a fruit salad. My example is always, making a creature with the head of a lion and the tail of a snake, and it's not like that. But when it comes to all these other artifacts and things like architecture and weapons and clothing and stuff, it's you see what's possible, or how far you can take stuff, and that's sort of the secret. Because once that sort of loosens up in your brain, that can help quite a bit. Where it's you almost become an inventor. It's you're inventing an ancient civilization as you're digging it up, and that's kind of that's the dragon that I chase all the time, is just trying to find opportunities to feel like I'm doing just that, where you're really building, world building and everything. That's my favorite stuff. So just readying up his skin, giving him some sunburn or some suntan. Jared's description did say that he was tanned, and he would be very tanned, but I kind of wanted to make it a little bit more like a sunburn than a good even tan of like a roofer would have. I figured, it's more visually interesting to me, but it also kind of implies that he sneaks around a lot, and he might do a lot of stuff under the cover of night, and I'd imagine that somebody who lives in the woods would probably sleep during the middle of the day, likely, at least in the summer. That's what a lot of animals do. Find some shade when it's cool. So here's just working on the hands a bit. He's got an archery glove around his main three fingers there. So yeah, there's the thumbnail there, just something dirty. I thought that would be just kind of neat. Even if it doesn't mean anything ex-military, it just makes sense for a guy that lives out in the woods to have some dirty fingernails. Now, one thing I regret is this this arm guard that he has on his forearm here. It looks flat or skewed or weird, like it's sort of supposed to be like a perfect cylinder going around his arm, but it doesn't really read that way. Everything on it is kind of slanted, and so it's sort of breaking the form of it. I could probably, it definitely would be a way to fix that, but it's too late. It's too late now. But I'll keep that in mind in the future. But some things are always just going to look weird. Yeah, Bloody Knuckles, I figured just, it shows how much he works with his hands, how intense his life is. It's a bit more brutal. here's another thing where I'm trying to make sure that the arrows are about the same length. If I was just doing the one, I could just make it whatever length I wanted. But since there's two, I found the length of how I based it mostly on how far I wanted it to be sticking out the quiver, and then I lined it up on this direction where I was going there, and then I took the one in the quiver and shortened it slightly because it's tilting away. It's foreshortened away from the camera, so it would be the same length as this one, just a little bit shorter from the inside, and then just a flint tip. Even this arrow was based on a photo that Jared sent me, so I did make the flint or the tip look a bit more flinty, something that he might have napped himself. But yeah, everything else, like all the feathers, like the shape of the feathers and the colors and everything. I mean, he's got good taste. All the stuff looked really good, so I was happy to do it. So yeah, just carving away. One thing that I would always recommend to people is if you're like me and you're just using the one brush, like the simple circle, it happens a lot in digital and traditional art too, but losing the fine points to the brush, and that's no good. So if you do like a corner, like if you got Photoshop open or whatever software you're using, and you draw a square and you fill it in, you'll notice the corners are really rounded, and that can ruin stuff. Like that can just make everything look so bad. It's always worth carving that out again with either an eraser or with a masking layer. Just to, like, you want to make sure that those fine points are represented, because then you can still have blobby stuff, but if it's sharing the canvas with the pointy edges or the pointy corners and the proper, there's some proper bowline knots there holding the string up to the bow there. Me just getting fancy with my notes. A really good book to get for a concept artist would be the Ashley Book of Knots. It's just this massive library of knot work and everything, and that stuff comes in handy in real life, but also in world building and like character design, where it's like, how would somebody, like if you're designing like a marketplace, if you can just see how, like, what people can do with ropes and fiber and cordage, and like how they can, like what functions it holds, and how much more to a knot and knot work there is than just a squiggle or a rope belt. Like, yeah, it's useful for really useful for real life, like learning knots, but it's good for art too. So that's just me. That's my recommendation there. I don't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, the pointy cornery stuff. Yeah, make sure that you don't lose that stuff to your brush. It'll come in handy. It makes things work a lot better. So you can have big blobby general shape things, but then if it's contrasted with pointy, like sharp silhouettes that need to be there, then the better. Actually, when I was just one thing I wanted to note was when I was adding all this mud to his outfit here, it sort of reminded me of something that I think might have been like the catalyst for me wanting to become a concept artist. And it was when I was I guess I would have been about 15 or 16. I was watching the Lord of the Rings special features, and I remember seeing there was a part where Ian McKellen was mentioned to the costume designer that Gandalf's cloak would need to be muddy and have like some leaves or like a bit of twig caught up in the robe. And I think that was my first like wake up moment to this sort of stuff, was like the visual history of a character and like what would need to be there if this character was actually living in the world they live in. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was like the first spark that really set me on this way. I wonder if I should just send Ian McKellen a thank you letter about that. And that was really fun. So very different process, different experience with this piece. But I'm really happy with the result. I was scared for a long time. It wasn't working. I was fighting it. And then once I just relaxed and just decided to work on it and not think about how I was going to work on it, it started to just flow out. So thank you to Jared. Thank you for your very thorough descriptions and reference. And I look forward to corresponding with you more on like reference and information and historical things of historical value. I'm looking forward to learning what you can teach me. But anyway, this was for the free weekly character art lottery that I hold every Monday in 2016. So follow me at Twitter at RND Fantasy, and on Sundays I'll let you know what hashtag to tweet to enter, and I'll draw your D&D character free of charge. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope it helped.